I would absolutely do my career again, if I could.
I did enjoy my 21 years in the Coast Guard. It's a humanitarian service, and I'd recommend it to anybody.
I think it's a wonderful career, and I truly recommend it and suggest it.
Would I do it all over? Yes, I'd do it all over again. It was a very good job. I enjoyed it very much. And you spend most of your life in law enforcement, yeah, you'd do it again. You might do things a little differently, but I can't go back and fix anything.
I'd have to say it was the greatest job that you could possibly have. There was never 2 days that were the same. Did everything from fraud investigations to drug smuggling cases, so there was never a dull moment.
So I would want to get into it a lot sooner than I did.
But let me put it this way. I retired in 1981. So for 33 years now I've been collecting a payment for my 22 years in the Coast Guard. Very well satisfied.
I would do it all over again, sure. I spent 5 years as an agent, 10 years active duty total, and then another 10 years in the Coast Guard Reserves. But the 5 years I spent as an agent was what allowed me to become a law enforcement instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia. And I spent 21 years instructing other federal agents how to do their job. And, I loved every minute of it.
Well, you signed a contract and you were expected to continue doing your job. And I did love my work.
We did background investigations. I'd take off on road trips for 30 days at a time or a week or two longer. And you drive all over and you're on your own. They give you a lot of responsibility. Coast Guard gave me a lot of responsibility. A young kid, and I get to play with millions of dollars worth of ships and airplanes, and I thought that was great. No wonder I kept re-enlisting.
What kept me going? I actually enjoyed what I was doing. Every day was different, every day was a challenge, and sometimes you just didn't know what to expect, but you did what you had to do to get it done.
I would say to the members serving in the Coast Guard today that there'll be a lot of challenges, but it's working together as a team and, make it the best of the situation you've got. Enjoy what you're doing and make the best of it.
I loved my time in the military. I served with many dedicated and devoted people.
I would do it again if I had to do it. I was very active in the creation of Coast Guard Investigative Service and how that came about. And once it stood up, I was offered an opportunity to transfer to headquarters and be in charge of the Chief of Investigations for it. So being that involved in the formation of what is now CGIS and have seen how it's taken off and has maintained its level of professionalism with the other military criminal investigative organizations, most of which have been around much longer and much broader, if you will. That was a great experience. Yeah, I would do that again, and I'm kind of proud of that work.
Well, first of all, they always say that when you achieve the rank of Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, even though you served for 4 years, you're given a number because what number you are, and I was the 8th, or I am the 8th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, and you're the 8th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard for life. That means that even in retirement, your role continues to work with upholding and embracing the history, heritage, and traditions of the service. So that keeps me going because when I was selected as Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard in 1998, I knew that it meant that it wasn't just for those 4 years while I was in uniform. It truly means for life.
Also, we have the Coast Guard Investigative Association. Right here they are. Look at them, look at these guys. Good to have you, and thank you for your service. I have a little research here I was going to read about these fellas. If you're not familiar with, oh, there it is, the Coast Guard Investigative Association. Y'all, can y'all stand? Where's all of our Coast Guard? Stand up for just a minute. First of all, give all these folks a big hand, if you would. Look at them. That's fantastic. No, there you go. Can I just tell you, I'm going to tell you a little, in case you're not aware of this, the Coast Guard Investigative Association is made up of former and currently serving special agents. Some were members of the older Coast Guard intelligence and law enforcement group, and some with the newer Coast Guard Investigative Service. After World War II, the Coast Guard, consisted of only 38,000 members, with small growth to the current 42,000 members. Some 400 are special agents authorized to carry a firearm, execute and serve any order, warrant, subpoena, or summons under authority of the United States, and make arrests. They are the fifth branch of our military armed forces. They are also our nation's oldest continuous seagoing service since 1790. And we have a group of them with us tonight. So give these folks a big hand if you would. It's so good to have you. And again, thank you for your service. We appreciate you very much.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Heavenly Father, we humbly ask that you bless our little gathering this morning and clear our minds of any distracting thoughts.
I have the honor of installing you, who have been chosen by the membership, to administer the affairs of the association for the period elected. I congratulate you. Thank you very much for being willing to do this. Please place your left hand on the Bible before you. Officers, and answer the following questions in the affirmative. Will you conscientiously perform all the duties of your office as prescribed by the rules governing the association?
Yes.
Yes.
I definitely would do it over again. The only thing I wouldn't do is I wouldn't have retired when I did, and I would have stayed on active duty rather than trying to advance up.
Probably not get in as much trouble as I did in the beginning when I was younger.
If I were to do it all over again, the only thing I would have done right the first time was learn about the Coast Guard. I would have went to the recruiting office straight and not let it be a mistake. But I would do it all over again, everything. Even the mistakes that I made during the course of my time, and everybody makes mistakes. I learned so much from them, and it made a better person out of me. But I would do it all over again. And everybody, every young person that I talk to about the military, and I talk about the Coast Guard, I talk about my experience, I talk about the responsibilities that I got at such a very early age, and then to achieve the dream that I had from 3 weeks into the Coast Guard, that I wanted to be Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. And I know that's a kind of hard thing for people to say, that only one person gets to that rank. But I wanted that, and I knew that I had to work hard. I also knew I had to pay attention. I also knew that there were people that were going to help me along the way to at least give me the opportunity to achieve that. So how can I not say that if I had to do it all over again, that I wouldn't do it the same way?
Mark time. Mark. Squad. Halt. Left. Face. Present colors. Everybody join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation.
My advice to the current men and women on active duty, I would recommend that you stay involved, have fun, and make every day count.
Be honest, play fair, enjoy it, because you will only get out of the Coast Guard what you're willing to put in. If you take the right attitude, go in, do your best, don't do it for yourself, do it for the Coast Guard. You'll find out that you're enjoying life every day, you're having fun, People are going to look up to you. You'll get lots of promotions along the way.
I would remind every person in the Coast Guard that they're a leader, from the newest seaman up to the highest admiral. And the best leadership trait they can show is to hold their people responsible and accountable for their actions.
I would say if any of the young guys could take notes of what's going on, because your memory begins to fail you, as in my previous story. Take notes and write them down when you can, because you'll be able to look back at them and some of them will be very funny, some of them might be sad, some of them might be heroic on other person's part, and you want to remember these things.
I think the biggest thing I can tell people that join the military today is to kind of just go with the flow, because everything changes. When I was in years ago, it's not like that today. And I think the biggest thing is just to avail yourself and make things work, because if you don't, you're not going to make it.
Work hard and you'll get paid back 3 or 4 times over.
I'd say just enjoy your career as much as you can.
Well, for those that are currently enlisted in the Coast Guard, you're in the smallest of all the services. That can be a shortcoming or it can be an asset. And I would say take your time in the Coast Guard and use it to the maximum. Set a goal for yourself and shoot for it. Being in the smallest service, one of the benefits is that you can achieve anything you want to achieve. It's just a matter of dedicating yourself and applying yourself and getting the job done.
To remember the benefit of the country and their fellow men and women they're serving with. And remember, this is the greatest country in the world.
I would say for the people in the Coast Guard today, I know the Guard is a little different today than it was years ago, but really you need to do what you got to do when you got to do it, and don't complain, because it's not going to help.
If I were asked to recommend what Coast Guardmen should do during their time in the Coast Guard, I would say that they need to remember our motto is to be semper paratus, always ready. We have always seemed to be ready to do what seems impossible many times. As a surfman, or as a rescue pilot, or as a boat coxswain, they were always ready, and we always have been ready to do the job, to help people. And they need to train, they need to do the absolute best they can on their tests and their practicals, so that we may continue to be always ready.
The words of wisdom I'd have for them is to realize they're in a unique military branch of service. You know, we have law enforcement responsibilities and duties that other branches of service don't do, and our effectiveness is by cooperating with the other agencies when we do these cases, whether smuggling operations or boardings with the Navy. A lot of our effectiveness is joint operations.
Think about that. Basically, remember where you come from and be true to who you are. One of the things that I teach agents, I'm an instructor, is that, you know, integrity is everything. And so when you lose that, you lose a whole bunch of who you are. So stay true to yourself.
As a fellow was here before me mentioned, that the Coast Guard does daily what they're supposed to do. They don't have to practice it. But one of the things I've noticed in the new Coast Guard is the reliance on electronics, the reliance on satellites. If the satellites are gone, you don't have any navigation. Go back to basics.
I would say the important part is understanding your service, understanding that the history, heritage, and traditions of our service are very important, and they're paramount to understanding what your job is, what your importance to your role and mission to this organization. The Coast Guard stands for what it is, being successful, being always ready, is always based on the fact of looking at that long legacy of people before us who have done exceptional work, and we should always remember that. So to the people in the Coast Guard today, what I tell them is look at the past, because the past helps define the future.
Jump, cover, right base, half step, forward march.
I'm a plank owner. Bruce Shields and I were, well, he was the originator and I kind of let him bounce questions off my head. I'm plank owner, number 6 member. The association is a wonderful thing for me because there's a lot of old friends, people from the old Coast Guard, people from the investigators part of it back when we were investigators instead of special agents. Camaraderie, the whole thing is great.
I was the first warrant officer assigned to Coast Guard Intelligence in 1979, 1980, excuse me.
No, it was the, especially my time with the Coast Guard Investigative Service. That led me to a second career with the Defense Department doing fraud investigations. And I can say I was fortunate enough to truly, truly love my job. I enjoyed going to work every day. I look forward to it. And I owe all that to one of our founding fathers of this organization, Bruce Shields, who was just a great leader and a great teacher. And to Dick Denicio, the father of the Coast Guard Investigative Service, who had the faith in me to select me for the job.
Captains, and they're in consideration for admiral, flag rank. And before they can be promoted to flag rank, they have to do a background investigation by these Coast Guard investigators, we were called then, XI designated investigators. And E5s could be on there, and Coast Guard at that time, you didn't have to have even a high school education. And a lot of our investigators were at least high school graduates, and very few of them had any college at all. And the idea was that somewhere out in the background there's some second-class bosun mate, and of course a lot of people look out and say, well, he's a knuckle-dragging cretin. He's out there asking questions about me, who's going to be an admiral, whether I'm qualified to be admiral. And there's this lowly enlisted man out there deciding because of this investigation, asking questions about me.
I'm trying to think of the other funny event that happened, but I can't, it's completely slips my mind, so I'm probably not supposed to tell you.
I was pretty lucky. I got involved in some pretty good stuff. When I was in Boston, we had a coastie that appeared to be leaking information to the enemy. And I was able to find that out from the source. And so I set up a meeting for this. I was not a special agent. I was a security manager, but I did the briefings to warn people if somebody approaches you, get a hold of me. So that's what he did. And I notified the special agents, and they met with this fella and realized this was not a joke. And it turned out that one of our special agents was riding in the same carpool as this guy. So he went along, and he had picked up on the first fella because he was grumbling about wanting to get out. You know, he was tired of the Coast Guard. So the special agent did the same thing, you know, grumbling, I'm tired of this stuff. And the kid just fell for it. He said, well, hey, I can pay you $1,000 a week. Just all I need is some stuff. And he says, oh man, I don't know. He says, he opened up his shirt and he pulled out this classified documents, saying, I'm already getting them. I can get them from you. They'd be better. So he says, okay. So we provided him with them. They weren't the right ones, but it's okay.
I retired as a chief warrant officer back in 2002. That's when I became old, fat, and happy. So I am now old, fatter, and happier.
The thing that stands out the most for me is that Coast Guard Intelligence made the mistake of making Agent Mary Wood my partner, and we ended up getting married. So I'm the first agent to marry the first female agent in Coast Guard Intelligence.
One of our agents, I won't name him, although I'm sure a lot of the guys here remember it, Ice Island T3, a bunch of years ago, half a century ago. We had a bunch of scientists on it from several nations, and there was a murder. Okay, this is a floating island of ice. Who has the responsibility? Well, it came down to the Coast Guard, because as a floating chunk of ice, it's a vessel. Coast Guard has responsibility for all vessels with American citizens on board of American flagged vessels anywhere in the world. So they took a helicopter out there with one of the investigators from the Washington field office, and they dropped him in that ice. He did the investigation, made the arrest. They come back, picked him up, flew him back to continental United States, and he dropped his prisoner off at, well, the law reads that the first port of call gets the jurisdiction for the courts. That they had already picked that out beforehand, so they didn't touch U.S. soil until they got to the right port, the right entry.
I was a reserve agent, so I spent 26 years, as an agent, but I was also working a second job, so there are so many memories, I couldn't even tell you what sticks out.
I think the number one memory was I believe I was one of the first civilian agents that came on. So that was pretty effectual as far as memories, as far as being with the Coast Guard.
During the course of my Coast Guard career, I worked with a lot of agents for a variety of reasons. When I was on recruiting duty, I had an opportunity to talk with a lot of agents that were doing background investigation checks on people that we were bringing in. And then later when I moved into personnel assignment jobs, I actually did some direct work when I was in the 9th District with the Office of Law Enforcement, with the special agents that were doing some surveillance work, and they would come to me to ask some questions about administrative. I would also make what was called dummy records for agents that were going to be embedded into a unit as a Coast Guard member at a particular unit. And later, during my tenure as Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, the senior special agents in the Washington, D.C. field office met with me to talk about the problem of retention of Coast Guard agents. The problem was we were bringing people into the job. They came from all kinds of different ratings, machinery technicians, electricians' mates, boatswain's mates, all in specialties that really required them to have hands-on experience in that particular profession in order to get advanced. They go off into being special agents, which were special jobs that was out of their, what we call out of their rating. And in the end, they were doing exceptional work as agents, but they could not get promoted. And when the senior special agents talked to me about that, I advocated for them an opportunity to create a career path for agents, which the specialty for becoming warrant officers. So when an agent went into the program and he or she would be in the program for 4 years, they would be recommended to stay beyond that, then they would get advanced to warrant grade, and then this way they were able to stay in, continue to do exceptional work, and get paid for it.
Tremendous amount of energy that Bruce has expended, the tremendous amount of time and spirit that he's put into this has made it a great gathering. So again, thank you, Bruce.
You can remain
remain seated. You don't have to stand. I'm just going to give an invocation. So just bow your hearts. Eternal Father and Lord of hosts, we humbly ask your blessing upon those of us assembled in council as wisdom to share in such a way that we all leave the table with far more than we brought. Next thing something I wanted to feature in here was a missing man ceremony. And I'll explain it. You'll see this table here. And like I say, as you enter the dining area, you may have noticed this table here at the front. And it's raised somewhat to call your attention to its purpose. And it's reserved to honor our missing comrades and ours. Normally they set the table for 6 with the other 5 services, but we have a limited situation that we have to set for 1. But normally it would have 6 representing a missing person from each of the 5 services, the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and the Coast Guard, and civilians. This honor ceremony symbolizes that they are with us here in spirit. Now, some in this room were very young when they entered into combat. However, all Americans should never forget brave men and women who answered the nation's call and served the cause of freedom with honor. And I'd like to ask that you might stand for just a minute and remain standing for a moment of silent prayer. A single red rose displayed in a vase reminds us of the life of each of the missing and the loved ones and friends of these Americans who keep the faith, awaiting answers. The vase is tied with a red ribbon, symbol of our continued determination to account for our missing. A slice of lemon on the bread plate is to remind us of the bitter fate of those captured and missing in a foreign land. A pinch of salt symbolizes the tears endured by those missing and their families who seek answers. The Bible represents the strength gained through faith to sustain those lost from our country, founded as one nation under God. The glass is inverted to symbolize their inability to share this evening's toast. The chair is empty. They're missing. Let us now raise our water glasses, if you would, in a toast to honor our American people.
Because the surveillances, the hours, you were out of town like 2 and 3 and 4 days without being able to call, without being able to say where you are. And I've taught a lot of, but I don't see how any woman can make a marriage with a special agent in the Coast Guard. Because you don't know, they can say they're down at the library doing research, which they do have to do. Thank you, women, very much. I did get a phone call. You know, we really don't appreciate you being out on the road with our husbands. I tried to assure them they did not have to worry. It was like just being with my brothers, but they didn't go for that. Yeah. But thank you. Thank you very much for being such good wives to these.
We were working a drug case up in Northern California, and there was one of the guys that was out there with me had absolutely no experience in the wilderness, and every time that there was any kind of a sound or any kind of a noise at all, he was sure there was some bear out to get him.
And the thing I used to laughably say was the reason the officers don't carry a badge and credentials and go out and do the work we did. It's not really officer-like to have to make arrests of people that don't want to be arrested, and you're rolling around the gutter or on a rooftop or somewhere trying to apprehend a deserter or something, and it's just not the kind of thing you expect of an officer and gentleman to be doing.
We had some practical jokers that worked with us, and I think probably the funniest thing I can recall is one of the guys got dumped on with all the shredded material at his desk. So.
Practical jokes were always part of the game. And I can remember one time there was I won't go into any details, but you know, we were down in a district office and 2 of our agents were doing interviews. I had just come back with another agent from the range qualifying with our weapons, and unbeknownst to me, they were sitting in the next room doing an interview, and we had a policy that whenever you walked into the office, if your weapon was loaded, you had to unload it, and there was a certain procedure to go through. And I'm standing with this, the old .45 caliber handgun and I'm what they call ratcheting it to make sure there's no bullets or anything like that. And the person being interviewed is listening to this, has no idea what's going on. He's thinking somebody's out there getting ready to shoot him or something. Finally, one of the agents had to come out of the interview room and said, "Hey, you need to stop that. We're interviewing somebody." So it was, but the look on the person's face was amazing. He heard that ratcheting, and I don't know what the questioning was at the time, but it kind of upset him pretty much. So we thought it was funny. Obviously, the person getting interviewed didn't think it was funny at all.
Well, before I entered Coast Guard Intelligence, I drove for 2 separate admirals. And one time we were trying to find ourselves to a naval base, and we got lost in New Orleans. And I was down in the wrong section. And because the admiral had never driven in that area, he didn't know how to get out, and I didn't know how to get out. So he would say, "Well, just turn here." So I'd turn that direction. And then he'd say, "Well, maybe take this direction." So I'd turn that direction. And I finally stopped and said, "Admiral, I don't know where to go." So we continued driving and finally found our way to the naval base.
Whenever I got involved in pranks, I always got into trouble. And that's why I don't remember or don't want to remember any of these things.
Once I started learning Coast Guard stuff, when I got out of the Army in '88, we didn't have email. And when I arrived in New Orleans about 2 years later, they did have email, so I didn't know anything about it. And at one point, I was standing around with the guys just kind of not doing anything, and the branch chief came out and said, and I need an answer to this email. And so I said, "I don't do email." So he opened up the yeoman's email, or my email on the yeoman's computer, and said, "Read this." So I sat down and I read it, and then I looked back at him and said, "No, we don't have to do that." And he said, "No." He said, "You hit reply and you send the answer back." And so I went over to the yeoman's desk and I picked up a memo pad and a pencil, and I said, "If you have any more questions for me, sir, if you would just write them down on this piece of paper, I'd be glad to answer them for you." That didn't go over real well. So eventually, in about a month or so, he sent out a big email announcing that the former Army guy is now on email, and probably everyone in the world is now that I am. So that was pretty weird.
Funny memory would be steering a buoy tender on an ice-covered river, and with a bunch of officers on the bridge of the wing. I was enlisted at the time, I think a seaman. And they were looking for buoys in the river, and I forgot what river. Probably the Potomac from Washington. And the ice would flow down, and the buoys are chained to the bottom, so it pushed the buoys under the ice as it flowed. So you would see this light from underneath the bottom flashing up. And there was a couple of them. I guess they were having a hard time finding, but they said, "Well, let's steer kind of where the channel would be." And that's kind of hard to tell when everything's ice and snow. And so I went down the river where I thought I should go, and all of a sudden I hear a bang, 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 and everybody's running out to the wings of the bridge. I ran over the buoy, and it popped right out of the water. They said, "Well, that's one way to do it."
Well, I think the funniest thing that happened to me was, it really starts joining the Coast Guard. I was on my way to join the Navy, and I walked into the wrong recruiting office because back then the Coast Guard uniform was the same as the Navy uniform, and I was too embarrassed to turn around and walk out after I found out that the Coast Guard was a service for me, because I didn't know much about the Coast Guard. But later in boot camp, 3 weeks into boot camp, I see a picture of the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. First time I ever saw what that rank was, and the rank was still fairly new. This was in 1972. So our Blue Jackets manual did not have the rank in the book. It showed that a Master Chief had 2 stars. But this picture I saw was a Master Chief with 3 stars, and I didn't know what he was. So I asked the company commander, who is that? And he says, "That's the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard." And then I said, "Well, what does he do?" And then he gets in my face and he says, "He tells the Commandant what to do." So I thought that was pretty cool. So fast forward a couple of weeks, We're sitting in a day where we sit down with what our battery scores were, what schools we qualified for. And so innocent 17-year-old seaman recruit Vincent Patton tells his career counselor, well, what school do I go to become the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard? Well, he thought I was being a smart ass, so he calls my company commander. The company commander comes and grabs me by the shoulder, and this back in the days they could touch you. Grabs me by the shoulder, marches me out to the parade field, or the grinder as we call it, and makes me do 50 push-ups. So when I do the 50 push-ups and I stop, snap to attention, this is July, I'm sweating and everything, and he gets all in my face. He says, Patton, the day you become the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, that's the day I'll walk on clouds. Well, that man was a visionary, because 2 years before I became Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, he died. So he must really have been walking on clouds when I became Master Chief of the Coast Guard.
Some of you had a chance to look at this. If you haven't, it's the memorial plaque. And it says, in memory of Kenneth N. Brandel, Special Agent, Coast Guard Investigative Service. And also asked her if she sent a photograph, which I have up here, so you have a chance later you can pass by and take a look at these things. And on the back of it, I had an inscription engraved, and I'll read it to you. A lot of you will be familiar with this. It's not an unusual poem in that sense. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not here. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on the snow. I am the sun and ripening grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hushed light, I am the upfling of birds in flight. I am the soft star that shines at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die. The author was Mary Elizabeth Fry. Next one is Kenneth Ken Brandel, Russell Farrar, and then Joe Hamilton, and finally Lee J. Leba.
It's just been fun and dangerous, times pretty darn dangerous. I guess that's why they wanted you to learn how to shoot and carry a gun.
Because there were admirals that wanted to just kill this organization entirely. Just let the district commanders have it, or just let some other agency do the background investigations on these officers, because it was just a sticking and crawling there. Just something really bothersome, the idea that you've got these low-ranking enlisted people deciding, and they don't really decide, but they do the investigations as to who's going to make admiral.
The biggest challenge we had was trying to get the job done in the right way, and dealing with all the different commands in the Coast Guard, and make sure that we provided the needed service, the objective type investigations that they needed to work with in order to handle any type of disciplinary action or things like that.
Like I said, every day was a little different, so there was always a new challenge. I don't know there was any one particular challenge.
It was challenging when we first stood up the organization of Coast Guard Investigative Service. That was a whole new organization, and it was a lot of work to be done on that thing. And it was challenging, but it turned out to be good leadership up at headquarters, where I had fortunate enough to be transferred to, and they had good leadership up there, and everybody just made it work. It happened, and now it's, from what I understand now, 17 years later, it's thriving.
Sometimes there's a lot of hardships you put up with, or away from family and stuff like that.
Well, I went in Coast Guard Intelligence in 1982, and I was the first female Coast Guard Special Agent.
Well, the hardest thing for me is I'm basically an introvert. And as an agent, you have to deal a lot with people. So that was the hardest thing for me, is getting out, interviewing people, conducting interrogations. But you learn how to work through that.
When I first went in as a female, no one wanted to be my partner. But after I was in a while, they saw that I could be as good as the men.
I wouldn't call it a lot of challenges. I'd call it a lot of responsibility. The first time they tell you, well, here's your credentials, you're an agent or an investigator, go out and investigate this. Find out what you can do. Go arrest somebody, set it up for trial, court-martial. You start thinking, whoa, I'm going to have to do all that by myself? I don't have to refer to a commander or a captain or an admiral? Well, write up your report. They'll see it, but by that time it's done.
Probably the greatest challenges that I'd had was things like trying to punch through a thunderstorm, trying to go out to a sinking boat or something like that and pick somebody up. Some of the toughest times were trying to navigate through, at low levels, some of the channels that at night and going to rescue somebody from a little town in southeast Alaska. Very difficult to do, very easy to get killed.
I think a lot of the challenges and obstacles was created by Washington and not giving us what we needed to do our job more efficiently.
The biggest challenge we had as agents with the Coast Guard, with a lot of the officers, senior officers, knew the majority of us were enlisted. Yet we're the ones who were investigating them for wrongdoing in a lot of cases. So there had to be a way to put them at ease and at the same time get to show them that we're being professional about it, and sooner or later they would just forget about the rank difference and they'd cooperate, and that's what made us more effective.
There are numerous challenges. Obviously, being a civilian agent was a learning curve. We were behind the learning curve, but everybody rallied around us, and basically we meshed pretty well. So,
most of the obstacles were reserve officers. They didn't really have much talent.
Well, there's no question. When I came in the Coast Guard in 1972, the number one obstacle that I faced very early on in my career, I did experience some racial discrimination matters, but I learned something out of that. It wasn't that when somebody treated me wrongly because of the color of my skin, that it wasn't for me to jump on yelling or anything like that. I really counted on the people who I worked with, and they helped me to get through this, which is part of why I credit a lot of people that I served with, white, black, whatever color they were, that they were very, very helpful with me getting there. So those challenges that I had, it was people that worked with me that helped me get through it.
All right, this number is void. I will.
Yeah, man. It's 360.
Son of one. We collected 100 and count that.
I trust you. Get out of here.
Put it in the bank, will you?
Yeah, my bank.
Seeing it, here's the badge we're raffling off. It came from Plaque.
This lovely, our lovely assistant.
Upright.
Start, you want to auction it?
What's his name?
You're all losers.
Last one we have, that contains our agent.
All right.
Badge on either side. This is our challenge coin, and what I put in there, the history of the challenge coin, made it very familiar because I plagiarized it from you.
I know you had it set it off a lot.
Thank you. Value, and some are well worth having.
6546.
Is it your ticket?
Yeah.
Maine, we're going up there.
She's going on again.
But, well, I'll kind of do an introduction for Master Chief Patton here, a little bit ahead of schedule, but, well, actually, he needs no introduction, so I'm not going to do one.
That works for me.
Yeah. In reality, and I think everybody knows that he's also a PhD. He holds a doctoral degree, so he's earned the title of doctor, but I prefer to call him Master Chief because, you know what, I don't think being a PhD is all that hard.
That's right.
Compared to being a Master Chief.
That's right.
And here's what I'm going to say. This, as a way of introduction, my limited experience, interaction with Master Chief, I don't know whether you were a land area command chief or you were a headquarters visiting land area, but I remember listening to you at a speech a number of years ago, and I thought, boy, this guy's good. And if I can ever make it past ensign, I want a guy like this as my command chief. And I ended up not getting passed over too many times for ensign, so we moved ahead. But this guy is a real chief, and I think this is the best bio I can give on you, and the best salute I can give to you is that he is a real chief, and here's a quick and easy example. Ran into him yesterday when he first got into town, and you know, what are you doing tomorrow? He said, well, I'm going down to Arkansas to visit the Coast Guard lady. And many of you have heard about the Coast Guard lady, but she was a spar back in the old days, and has continued her interest in the Coast Guard and handwrites over 10,000 cards and letters a year to Coast Guardsmen around the world. And she just celebrated her 95th birthday? 95th birthday. Okay? So here this guy flies in, he's on somebody else's nickel, he's got time off in a great town where he could be doing a lot of other great things, but instead, what does he do? He does what a good chief does. He does the right thing, and he went and visited the Coast Guard lady. So that's the type of guy you're going to hear from a little later tonight. Without any further ado, I present to you Master Chief Vince Patton.
I wrote a speech so you won't be here longer than an hour. Well, good afternoon, Captain. Thank you very much to the guy that I recruited. Gosh, how long ago was that, Grant? 1976?
77, I think.
You know, Grant talked about all of these things he had to go through when he was coming in the Coast Guard. You know, he complained about, you may come back in second class. So I had to put up with this guy. And throughout our careers, because I was at his retirement when, so I could make sure he was leaving. And I always heard from Grant, and I was very proud of him because of the things that he did throughout the service. So it really is a great honor to get to see you all and chat with you. And I'm going to talk about something probably a little different. I mean, first and foremost, before I get into what I'm going to talk about, is about your profession as a whole. And Frank Tabor and I, we've worked together in Cleveland, and I was his mole, so to speak. Had to work with the agents when we were dummying up records, and Frank would come and say, well, we got to do a record now. So he come back to me after I did it up, and he says, this doesn't look right. I said, you never do a record to look perfect. Because out in the real Coast Guard, nobody has a perfect record. And Frank just said, it makes sense, doesn't it? I said, yeah, there you go. But your profession as a whole is something that's very unique, and something I have always honored by virtue of the fact of knowing a little bit more about what you do, and then seeing the evolution of how the Coast Guard Investigative Service Program has changed, even before my eyes. I'll never forget the time when during my time as Master Chief of the Coast Guard, when Jack Cornett and Marty Martinez came into my office. I had asked them to sit down and talk to them because I was in a meeting and we were talking about how much money the Coast Guard was wasting with folks that were going into CGI duty and the time that was spent. And just about every agent I talked to, they were getting out because they couldn't advance. So here you are, an MK or EM or whatever type of rating that you just can't study for in order to prepare to be able to go up to the next pay grade. And then meanwhile, you're in a profession of sorts that your civilian counterparts are making twice as much and so forth. So we were losing very good people. And I thought this was ridiculous. So I asked Marty and Jack, I said, have you guys ever thought about coming up with a track, a career track program for agents? And he said, well, we talked about it all the time, and it's all on deaf ears. I said, well, did you ever have any advocates? And they said, no, not really. I said, well, what if I can get the Master Chief of the Coast Guard and get involved in this? He says, well, would you really? I said, sure. Because where it was hitting home the most is that the Commandant, Admiral Lloyd, at the time, his own agent was getting out. Great guy. And he told us numerous times he didn't want to get out. He was getting out because he couldn't make chief. And so the next option for him was getting out of the Coast Guard. So I went over to see Admiral Lloyd and I says, boss, I got a plan. The plan is that let's look at creating a program within the CGI force to where they can make warrant and they can stay in, and then we got a happy crowd, because the money we're spending for people getting out of the Coast Guard and the experience that we were losing was ridiculous. And he says, that makes sense. So the program as it is today, I'm not saying I'm going to take credit for it, other than the fact that I paid attention. I paid attention to listening what many of you, particularly many of you, who during your time and during my time of seeing what kinds of things that you have done and what you do. I mean, truth be as it may, that TV show NCIS. I mean, you guys were NCIS Coast Guard wise when it wasn't cool, and you really did the right kinds of things. And I really applaud each and every one of you. And Mary, it's an honor to see you. Never met you before, but I knew of your name and the honor of the fact that serving as the first woman in that particular profession, and several have gone on since you, and I've talked to one of my dear friends, Peggy Recruito, who I had served with when she was a young, before she went as an agent, and she also talked about some of the challenges that she faced, but it was great to be in that role to finally see the groundbreaking, so it's really an honor to see you there. Well, tonight I want to talk about something different. It's something that's near and dear to me, and it's about history. And I think reunions are about history. I mean, when I was asked by Jack Pressler if I could come and speak here, he kind of asked with the sense of feeling that he didn't think that I would do this. And the answer is I would do this, because reunions are very important, because it really is about preserving our legacy. And particularly these types of professions that you in. I really don't think you have any real idea in terms of the groundbreaking that you've done and the time that you've been in to bring the program to where it is today. It's very critical. And it's also just as critical that you get together and continue to get together to whoever is the last man standing to ensure that we preserve this legacy. But I'm going to talk about something that when we talk about legacy, it's about our service song, Semper Paratus. Now, forgive me for not singing this with pride, but this is one of those songs that everybody's got to sing together, but I want to read it because I want you to hear it. From Aztec shores to Arctic zone, to Europe and Far East, our flag is carried by our ships in time of war and peace. And never have we struck it yet, in spite of foeman's might, who cheered the crews and cheered again for showing how to fight. We're always ready for the call. We place our trust in thee. Through surf and storm and howling gale, high shall our purpose be. Semper Paratus is our guide, our fame, our glory too. To fight to save, or fight and die, I, Coast Guard, we are for you. Now, I felt by reading these words is an affirmation of understanding the most important part of our history, heritage, and traditions by using this song to highlight our purpose here tonight. In the over 224 years of the existence of our service, men and women of our Coast Guard have consistently done the impossible, where we have always answered the call at any time, anywhere. When Captain Francis Saltus von Boskert wrote this song over 90 years ago, it was his desire to create something that sounded like a history book. He carefully wanted to ensure that our legacy as a humanitarian, naval, and military service would always be thought of whenever we would proudly sing this song. What I think Captain Van Boskirk didn't realize as he penned the words Semper Paratus was the beginning of establishing a record of our service's accomplishments and create a preamble that defined the very core values that we live by today: honor, respect, and devotion to duty. Listen carefully the next time you hear Semper Paratus. And the words of our Coast Guard's core value of honor, respect, and devotion to duty are inherently placed throughout the song. That's one of the reasons why I made it my personal commitment during my tenure as Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard to embrace our history, heritage, and traditions. I believe having every recruit that left the front gate of 1 Monroe Avenue, Cape May, New Jersey, to be required to learn and understand every word to Semper Paratus. The song itself is all about knowing what our standards are for this organization and being able to follow them. Just like the Marine Corps uses the words of their service song in the Marine Corps hymn. Over a dozen or so years ago, when I was on active duty in my position as Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, I was speaking at one of our annual Chief Petty Officer Association conventions. I had the importance of this song explained as it vividly described our service's legacy. It was somewhat surprising, at least to me, that during at that time, a large number of our enlisted workforce did not know the words to the song Semper Paratus. They could carry the tune but stumbled on the words, which bothered me quite a bit. Mostly because it was mandatory for officers going through the Coast Guard Academy, or OCS, to learn the song and actually sing it on demand correctly without hesitation. I had attended a change of command retirement ceremony for a captain that I had the pleasure of serving with over the course of my career. At the end of the ceremony, he asked everyone to join in to sing with him our Coast Guard song, Semper Paratus. As I looked around the audience, I could tell that many of the enlisted members stumbled on the words or said nothing. That bothered me. And sometime later, when I got back to my office at CGHQ, I sent out an email to all the Command Master Chiefs telling them about this observation that I had experienced at the change of command retirement ceremony. And it may have come as a surprise to some of you that I received a few replies back from the Master Chiefs admitting that they too didn't know the words to Semper Paratus. I felt at the time, and as I do now, how important it is to ensure that everyone, regardless of your rank or even your status, be you active duty, retired, reserve, auxiliarist, or civilian, to not only learn the words verbatim of our service song, but to also understand what every word and verse means, and then translate it on to subordinates, junior officers, or anyone that doesn't know the Coast Guard story. And to expand a little bit on this topic, there's another story here that I experienced that I'd like to point out. And it bears a little bit to understanding the merit of my case. During my tour as the Atlantic Area Command Master Chief in the mid-1990s, I attended a formal dinner event in New York City during their Fleet Week celebration. At this event, I happened to sit next to a young Marine Corps Lance Corporal, pay grade E3. Because I was in my traditional dinner dress attire, which to some doesn't give much distinction of whether you're in the Navy or the Coast Guard, it was difficult for the young Marine to notice my branch of service. So he readily assumed me to be Navy and asked a question about if I had ever served on an aircraft carrier. When I responded I was Coast Guard, his eyes lit up with gleam and began telling me the heroic story of Douglas Monroe, as if I had never heard it before. Now, this wasn't a typical 15-second, oh yeah, Douglas Monroe is your only Medal of Honor recipient, but rather a very detailed description of Monroe's life, when he joined the Coast Guard and why, and how he gave his life saving 5,000 Marines. This mini history lesson given by this Lance Corporal went on for about 5 minutes. Now let me tell you, I was impressed. In fact, to put it more succinctly, my jaw dropped in amazement. First of all, I knew this Marine couldn't have studied this overnight to hopefully sit next to a coastie and try to impress him with his knowledge. This young Marine talked about Douglas Monroe as if he were his father or some close relative. Dumbfounded by getting all of the detailed information, I asked the young Marine, who, by the way, had only been in the Marine Corps for 18 months at that time, who taught him this information and why? He looked me square in the eye with that typical Marine Corps stare of discipline and said with both a bit of pride and respect, he said, Master Chief, we learned that in boot camp. Douglas Monroe saved Marines. He's a part of us. You might also be interested to know that when the National Marine Corps Museum was built in 2008, among all of the hundreds of exhibits displaying the history of the Corps in the Marines Hall of Heroes, showcasing Marines who were awarded the Medal of Honor, Douglas Monroe is also included. So that young Marine was not only right about Monroe being a part of the Marine Corps history, but remains widely revered as part of their legacy. It was also during my tenure as Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard where in 1999, the Chiefs stepped up their game by making the impossible possible, holding an aggressive fundraising campaign as well as a do-it-yourself project rehabilitating Monroe's gravesite in Cle Elum, Washington. Monroe's grave was a simple plot in a small town of just a few hundred people, about 70 miles east of Seattle. Only the headstone, which was issued by the government, was the only significant sign that a true hero's final resting place was in this cemetery. The Monroe family had pretty much moved away from the town of Cle Elum, so just a small handful of people even knew about Monroe. However, for 40 years, Monroe's longtime friend, Mike Cooley, held a daily ritual where he would quietly go to Monroe's gravesite at Laurel Hill Cemetery in Cle Elum, raise the American flag in the morning, and at sunset would retire the colors. Cooley did this for 40 straight years, only missing one day because of pneumonia. Finally, as he approached his senior years, he knew he couldn't continue this for long, so he reached out for help. Cooley made a blind phone call to the Coast Guard base in Seattle, simply asking if the Coast Guard could install lights at the base of the flagpole so the flag did not have to be raised or lowered every day. The senior chief on the other end of the phone soon rallied the chief's mess. And by carload after carload, they trekked 75 miles one way east on I-90 over several days, taking on the task to not only install the floodlights, but they moved the flagpole closer to Monroe's grave, cleaned out and painted an old World War II gun mounts that were salvaged from a Navy destroyer, acquisition anchor chains to establish honor. You know, in telling this to ages, you know what I mean by that. Acquisition, right?
Well, they went to the Navy.
Acquisition anchor chains to establish an honor boundary around Monroe's gravesite, and a host of other improvements.
The thing that keeps you going is the family. There's no doubt about that. You don't take the job home, but the family makes it easy.
The job satisfaction was a huge part of it. I enjoyed what I was doing. And then the fact that at the end of the day, you get to go home and spend the time with your family, friends, loved ones.
Well, when you get into the intelligence business and you ask your detailers or somebody in the personnel office to send me overseas, I want to see the country. They say, well, what kind of security clearances you got? Oh, well, bump, 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 bump. Sorry, you got to stay in continental limits. I made it to Alaska back when it was a territory. More fun. I enjoyed it. You're going to give me an all-expense-paid trip to go up to the Pribilof Islands and watch the seals? And that was the first seal rookery. So you learn history. You get involved in the beginnings of this nation. The Alaska Purchase, Pribilof Islands was part of that. No one thing sticks out in my mind because it's all been a great adventure for me, and I can think and remember and see all these wonderful happenings and great people and things that just pass before your eyes.
Well, the only time I was overseas was in Bermuda, and what kept us going was probably beer.
What kept me going? Just the fact that I was part of the service, that I had to. I come from a background of having to do a job. When you have a job to do, you do it to your best.
Well, it was the people in the Coast Guard that got me going. I think back to when I first came in the Coast Guard, and my whole interest of the Coast Guard was about being in a service that was about the people taking care of each other and seeing how the missions were being handled. It was not an individual single role, that it was a teamwork effort. So that kept me going because I found throughout the course of my career that the people around me helped me along the way. And then I kind of carried that tradition on to helping others. And it was those folks, or as I like to say, I've always felt that I stood on the shoulder of giants, of people that helped me to achieve to the position that I got to today. So I didn't do it by myself. There were a lot of people along the way, not just people senior to me, people junior to me, as well as my counterparts.
Interestingly, today, September 27th, marks the 72nd anniversary of Douglas Monroe's heroic action on Guadalcanal, as well as his death. I believe it is only fitting that I openly read a citation that accompanied the award of the Congressional Medal of Honor. And I ask for those of you who are willing and able to stand, to please stand while I read. The President of the United States of America takes pride in presenting the Medal of Honor to Signalman First Class Douglas Albert Monroe, United States Coast Guard, for extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry and action above and beyond the call of duty, as officer in charge of a group of Higgins boats engaged in the evacuation of a battalion of Marines trapped by enemy Japanese forces at Point Cruz, Guadalcanal, on September 27, 1942. After making preliminary plans for the evacuation of nearly 500 beleaguered Marines, Monroe, under constant risk of his life, daringly led 5 of his small craft toward the shore. As he closed the beach, he signaled the others to land, and then, in order to draw the enemy's fire and protect the heavily loaded boats, he valiantly placed his craft with his 2 small guns as a shield between the beachhead and the Japanese. When the perilous task of evacuation was nearly completed, Monroe was killed by enemy fire, but his crew, 2 of whom were wounded, carried on until the last boat had loaded and cleared the beach. By his outstanding leadership, expert planning, and dauntless devotion to duty, he and his courageous comrades undoubtedly saved the lives of many who otherwise would have perished. He gallantly gave up his life in the defense of his country. Signed, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President. Please be seated. A footnote here: among the Marines who took part in this operation was the notable famous Marine, Lewis Chesty Puller, who was a lieutenant colonel at the time. It was Puller who submitted the recommendation for Monroe to posthumously be awarded the Medal of Honor. And also, as a testament of Monroe's selfless act of courage, his last words as he whispered to his fellow shipmate and childhood friend, Seaman First Class Ray Evans, He said, "Did they get off?" I have often used the phrase, "Be the example, set the pace, and follow the standards of conduct," whenever I describe what I think is an understanding of what true performance is. In order to live up to those words, you have to know what our past is all about, what it has taught us, and what today and our future will bring to carry on. As we look back at our organization's past accomplishments, we learn with envy and sometimes with curiosity just how it is a cluster of people from all walks of life get together for the common good. With limited resources, our service always had, and we sometimes tend to make it happen without a trace of showing any difficulty. The Coast Guard has always been an organization made up of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The first chorus stanza of our service song says it all. We're always ready for the call. We place our trust in Thee. It defines who we are and what we are challenged to do anytime or anywhere. You know, history is a wonderful thing. It tells us a lot about our culture, about ourselves. Many of us learn a great deal of experiences through the eyes of those who have gone before us. We picked up the examples of what's good, what's great, and what we should be thinking about doing again. However, most importantly, we get a great sense of understanding what our core values are all about. In my 30 years of active Coast Guard service, I've often heard from people who are quite intrigued about our service. The mystery that surrounds our existence, that tells the great stories of our past, must not remain a mystery. We have a story to tell, often through the eyes and mouths of those among us. I will challenge anyone, anywhere, anytime, that anyone who is or have served in the Coast Guard, regardless of status, active, reserve, retired, veteran, auxiliarist, civilian, have a sense of pride and enthusiasm that no other organization can match. It is time for us to step forward today and tell that part of our history that binds us through our service song, our core values, and our camaraderie with one another. Also, during my tenure as Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, I made it a practice that each time I gave my annual oral testimony before the U.S. House of Representatives, in which at that time was before the House Transportation Subcommittee, which the Coast Guard was under at that time, I thought it was appropriate to praise the great things that our people have done in the previous year. And in keeping with my good friend and mentor, the late Chief Alex Haley's statement of find the good and praise it, I believe it's important to recall the numerous great deeds our people have done for our service. For every medal that was awarded to someone, there's scores of others who have had a hand in making that recognition happen. These are the historical stories we must capture and continue to share with one another. And as a reminder that our service's legacy of being a high-performing organization. As I close, I'd like to leave with you one less used piece of documentation as a reminder why Semper Paratus is more than just a song. In 1938, then Commandant of the Coast Guard, Vice Admiral Harry G. Hamlin, published a proposed creed to capture the elements of what is a Coast Guardsman. Just as the song Semper Paratus captures the history of our service, the creed of a Coast Guardsman tells about the people who make the history so rich in tradition and proud to serve. The creed goes like this. I am proud to be a United States Coast Guardsman. I revere that long line of expert seamen who by their devotion to duty and sacrifice of self have made it possible for me to be a member of a service honored and respected in peace and in war throughout the world. I never, by word or deed, or bring reproach upon the fair name of my service, nor permit others to do so unchallenged. I will cheerfully and willingly obey all lawful orders. I will always be on time to relieve and shall endeavor to do more rather than less than my share. I shall always be at my station, alert and attending my duties. I shall, so far as I am able, bring to my seniors solutions, not problems. I shall live a joyous, but always with due regard for the rights and privileges of others. I shall endeavor to be a model citizen in the community in which I live. I shall sell life dearly to an enemy of my country, but give it freely to rescue those in peril. And with God's help, I shall endeavor to be one of his noblest works, a United States Coast Guardsman. Though this document was written and published 76 years ago, every word to that creed still follows true today. Besides the story of Douglas Monroe, there are many others throughout our 224-year history that superbly matches the words of our service song. From the Pea Island Life-Saving Station heroes, the rescue efforts of lighthouse keeper Ida Lewis, the one-man single-handed rescue efforts of Chief Boatswain's Mate Richard Patterson during the unfortunate friendly fire incident that occurred on the Point Welcome in Vietnam, as well as other notable events throughout our Coast Guard history. All are evidence of pride and enthusiasm from being anointed a coastie. Many of us here in this room can probably lay claim to the fact that we have performed a noble service during our tenure and have upheld the value, belief, and passion of our service to the motto and song, Semper Paratus. Fellow Coast Guardsmen, ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honor to speak with you today, and with the distinct pleasure of recognizing who you are and what you do, and applaud your efforts and your continued role of preserving our legacy. God bless you all. Semper Paratus.
Truly the epitome of what every Coast Guardsman should try to be. Here he is, how many years retired now?
12 years.
12 years retired, and he's still out there like a chief, teaching everybody. That was incredible. Thank you so much. Again, Bruce is going to lead us in the benediction.
Again, you can remain seated, you don't need to stand or anything. I'll just give a short prayer. Again, bow your hearts. Heavenly Father, we again give you praise and glory and thanks for the opportunity you've afforded us to come together in fraternal friendship, to renew warm bonds, formed and forged really in service to our nation, its people, and its leaders. And as we depart this assembly, we ask for your blessing on each and every one of us as we go our separate ways and travel to our homes and resume our day-to-day lives. And Lord, charge us all, each and every one, with a vitality and an eagerness to address and deal with our tasks and missions with fidelity and honor to those both senior and junior to us, that we would be a credit to our nation and be pleasing in your eye and blessing. This we pray, Father, in the name of your only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Or friends that I had as an agent, I still have many years later.
I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here with all these guys, and I enjoy coming. And hopefully, as time goes on, we can still keep getting together and having a good time.
I'm just very happy that Bruce Shields, who basically put this whole reunion stuff together every year, thank goodness for him. This is a great thing to come to. My wife and I look forward to it every year, no matter where in the country it's held. We go to it because it's just the people are just great to see. It just, you get that real good feeling inside of you when you see these people.
The association is, for me, it's been the culmination of a way of life, and I don't want to change that. Don't ever tell any of these people here, but I love them all.